What should and what will the Rangers do at the NHL trade deadline? Will they make the playoffs? And who will win the first Four Nations face-off?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1252 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. So, very special episode for you guys here today, a New York Ranger podcast crossover edition, if you will. Going to be joined here in just a minute by Joey and Stevie from Broadway Block. The everydayers, you guys will recognize the two of them as soon as they get in here and start talking Ranger hockey with me. I was able to actually join them on their show a couple of weeks back, and it's certainly time to return the favor here. It's always a good time talking hockey with Joey and Stevie. Like I said, going to be discussing the Four Nations face-off, the Rangers' approach to the NHL trade deadline, which players are still going to be here, which ones might get dealt. Will the Rangers ultimately make the playoffs? Talking about all this and more with Joey and Stevie of Broadway Block. Enjoy. All right, so with no further ado, let's go ahead and welcome in our very special guests for today. We've got Joey and Stevie from Broadway Block. And fellas, first of all, thanks for jumping on the show here. I know that, obviously I was on your podcast about a month or so ago, and we wanted to kind of, reconnect here, talk some Ranger hockey. And we'll get there eventually. But the first thing I actually wanted to ask about is this ongoing Four Nations face-off. We've got USA and Canada in the championship game on Thursday. I was optimistic about this tournament. I still feel like it's basically shattered my expectations. But what do you guys make of the inaugural Four Nations here? Are you having fun watching it, or are you just kind of missing the Rangers at this point?
I think it's a little bit of both for me. Like, obviously, the first game, like when you see the Canada lines come out, that first game that started the Four Nations face-off was just insane. Seeing McDavid out there with McKinnon and all that. And I've really liked, obviously, the USA coming in for the finals. That's been great. The Eichel to Chuck line has been super exciting. Obviously, we saw a little injuries there. Hopefully that will be back for the final. But also missing Rangers hockey. I felt like we were getting a little bit of a momentum there. And then to just pause, obviously we know Igor needed it for the injury that happened, sustained in the Pittsburgh game. But liking that there's hockey, just wish there was Rangers hockey.
Yeah, I would say I was, funny enough, not optimistic at all. Right beforehand, we recorded an episode, and Joe's like, what do you think, man? I was like, I just kind of want to get back to Rangers hockey, man. Boy, was I wrong. Love being wrong about hockey, and it just seems to be one of those sports where it can happen a lot. And, I mean, All-Star break has no expectation, no level of expectation, I feel like, for fans. And this was a really nice, pleasant surprise, in my opinion. I know you seem like you had a decent level of expectation, but I kind of went in thinking like, gee, I really want to see some Rangers hockey right now. But excited to see it come back. Definitely really, really excited to see this USA versus Canada recap, though, for the finals.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be interesting. Obviously, the intensity was off the charts for the round-robin game, and here we go, round two. I think the two teams that probably most people predicted would get here, and indeed they are here. But to put a little bit of a Rangers spin on the entire, Four Nations situation here, I don't know if this is just me trying to be optimistic, trying to talk myself into this, but my theory is that maybe this helps the Rangers. They've got 6 players that either were competing or are still competing in this tournament. And just the fact that this has been such a chaotic season, maybe it's good for even the guys not playing in the tournament to hit the pause button, catch their breath a little bit. Just your thoughts on this. I mean, do you think it could help this team in the long run, getting back after the break here, or is it kind of just whatever and let's just kind of see what happens?
I think it's great for the guys that are playing. I think they were the guys that were kind of doing stuff for us anyway. It's good to see JT Miller kind of more bonding with Trocheck on the team, and obviously Adam Fox and Kreider getting the goal the other night was great to see. So I think it's good there. And then I was just reading stories, Rangers stuff today, and even like the guys not playing are just as excited about hockey as we are. So I think that's exciting. And Igor getting a break, Russia not being into it, even though they'd have a powerhouse stacked team if they were in it. Getting the break is great. So I think it's overall a great thing going on for everybody.
Yeah, I'd agree with Joe. Something we touched on also on our show right before we recorded the little break there to start the Four Nations tournament was that Igor's got a 1 to 2 week injury. It kind of times out really well with the duration of the break. So it's kind of weird. Normally the break will like screw us up if it's whether it's All-Star break or if it's the holiday break. And I feel like the Rangers' momentum was kind of shifted this year by the turn of the year, the holiday break, and we were off to a tremendous start in January. And then kind of as things start to get back into like 500 hockey, like, yeah, maybe this little reset would be sort of a good moment in time to get a little regroup while some of the team, like you alluded to, John, are still getting some meaningful minutes, because that's another thing about this tournament that I was really surprised about is these guys really want to play in this tournament. So it's meaningful hockey for them. Some of the Rangers are still playing, and it gives the rest of the team the chance to kind of chill out. So well-timed in all aspects. And yeah, just looking forward to seeing the puck drop again.
Yeah, the thing that really sold me on being this being a good thing for the Rangers, and both of you touched on it a little bit there, but it's Igor Shesterkin. Obviously, look, there's never any good time to get injured in pro sports. I think we all know and understand that. But if there was ever an exception to the rule, this is it right here, because it sounds like, and we'll see what happens. I'm not sure if he'll be available for the first game back against Buffalo, but you have a 1 to 2 week timetable just at the same time when this tournament that's 2 weeks is starting. So in a way, maybe it'll work out just perfectly for the Rangers, and maybe things will finally start to break their way this season. But I got to ask, United States and Canada for all the marbles of this tournament Thursday night. What are your guys' expectations for that? And do you think Kreider, after scoring a goal in this most recent game, do you think he'll be back out there for the United States in this one?
I only think he'll be out there, to be honest, if like injuries allow it, because I think he saw the first game, the momentum they had. Obviously, both Tkachuk boys not being out there always for the second would be crushing for the second game. So I think they're going to be out or coming out strong. I think the USA can pull it off. I think they can. Obviously, Canada's going to come out hard. They didn't like how they got disrespected there, they feel like, so I think it's going to come down to like an overtime game, but I think it's going to be great, and I think the USA pulls it off.
Yeah, I do agree with Joe. I think that USA is going to pull it out. I mean, we're definitely due for a great game regardless, and it would be one thing if somebody was injured and this was like a huge blow, but it's like it is kind of funny that Quinn Hughes is like your call up, like that's your next guy in line as your seventh defenseman. But it is no doubt going to be really, really fun, and I do agree USA pulls it out.
Yeah, it's kind of wild that he wasn't there in the first place, and now it almost feels like they're like people were joking about it on social media that they're kind of just like making up the rules as they go along in this thing, where like United States is going to call up Quinn Hughes and maybe Canada will throw Tom Wilson out there or something like that, and try to go back against the United States physicality. But either way, yeah, it's been a fun inaugural tournament here, and obviously it's not very often that you see world competition in any sport kind of in its infancy here. Like the Olympics have been around forever, and the World Championships and the World Juniors, but we're going to see this tournament for the first time, and it's really been a blast. So, like you guys were saying, I think all three of us have certainly enjoyed it, but when the Rangers get back, we'll be looking forward to that as well. Gonna keep everything rolling in just a second. I'm going to shift our attention to the NHL trade deadline, and specifically the Rangers' plans for said deadline, and we will get to that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. Get snacking and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, we'll go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. And fellas, we got the NHL trade deadline not too far away. The Rangers play 7 games between now and then. We've seen them already do some wheeling and dealing this season. Obviously, Trouba, Kakko, and Hedl, all mainstays of Ranger hockey and all shipped away in season here. We'll get to some of the moves that the Rangers might make in terms of who they might acquire, who they might send away. But first of all, I got to get your thoughts on the JT Miller deal, because he is, it feels like it happened a long time ago, but I think he's only played about 4 games with the Rangers. So, the writing was kind of on the wall. It felt like it was going to happen. The Rangers eventually pulled the trigger, had to give up a conditional first, Philip Hedl, Victor Mancini. But for me, at least, the price was right. But I'm curious to get each of your takes on that. Just the Rangers, bringing JT Miller, bringing him back to New York.
Well, anybody who watches our show, me and Steve were kind of against the JT Miller trade, judging by how the season was going and all the locker room drama we were hearing about and not really know what was going on. And then we heard about their locker room drama. So we just felt like, JT Miller might not be the right fit. And we were also worried about how much we were going to give up. But then when we saw what we actually gave up, and to get a player of that caliber, me and Steve immediately hopped back on the JT Miller bandwagon. And it's fun and exciting. The first 2 games, you kind of felt like he was getting used to it. You knew he was going to score in that first game for us back in Boston. So that was really exciting to see. But you've seen like what it's done to the line combinations by having him back. Like at Mika's game already looks like he's going to be more comfortable back there. And going back to the trade deadline point, it's opened up a 3rd-line center spot. So it will be interesting to see if we make a move for a 3rd-line center there. But overall, I'm happy with it. And that's why I was also bummed about the Four Nation face-off, because I was super excited about the JT Miller trade and where we were heading after that.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of times on our show, we won't always agree. But I feel like today, Joe and I are basically completely in agreement that with the JT Miller move, it seems like the 3rd-line center becomes kind of the whole. There is some flexibility there, and I feel like the top 6, aside from maybe Trocheck sliding out of it, is essentially locked up. I don't think that we go out and make any major move. Like, I think the JT Miller move is the most splashy move that happens. But you have to imagine with the amount of deadline space that jury's probably not done. We probably act as like a broker where we can absorb a little bit of a contract. Maybe it's for a defenseman for a little bit of depth. Maybe it's for a 3rd-line winger or somebody that can play both a wing and a center. But I really do love the flexibility that Miller gives us, and I just feel like he plays with the identity we want to play with. Trocheck and his relationship going back a ways is really great, and it just seems like a homecoming on many levels for him, his family, and obviously the familiarity that he has with the organization. So it felt like kind of the right thing to do and kind of to right the wrong, which was getting rid of him. And like Joe touched on, what we gave up to get rid of JT Miller, I would argue is probably the lowest price that anybody could have paid for, and he controlled that destiny. So we got lucky again. It's something we mentioned before, but it feels like every year somebody just kind of forces their way to becoming a Ranger, and it feels good to be the team that people sort of like want to become. But yeah, it's odd that kind of seems like it keeps happening.
Yeah, I said the same thing on my show. It's very reminiscent of the Patrick Kane trade, because obviously it's a little bit different. Kane's obviously a legend in Chicago, and JT Miller in Vancouver, things were basically falling apart at the seams there in the last few days before he ultimately got traded. But in both cases, these guys have full no-move clauses, and they want to go to the Rangers. And that kind of plays into our hands and allows us to get both those players for obviously at least something of a discount. But obviously, yeah, I agree with both of you also that this probably feels like it's going to be the splashiest thing that the Rangers end up doing. But there's a couple of UFAs on the Rangers that maybe could be on their way out. Again, we've seen them do some wheelings and dealings this season. But you've got Ryan Lindgren, Reilly Smith, Jimmy Vesey, all in the final year of their deals. And I kind of want to focus in on Lindgren because he's the one that's been here the longest. Obviously, he's been like a heart and soul kind of a player for this team, but obviously also scuffling this season. What do you think about Lindgren? I mean, does he make it through the trade deadline? I don't think there's any way they re-sign him after the season, but do they hang on to him for a playoff push, or do you see them going in a different direction? And what would you like to see them do as it pertains to Lindgren?
Well, great point bringing up Lindgren. Obviously, defense has caused a lot of problems for Shesterkin, everybody who's played for the Rangers in net this year. Lindgren's been part of the problem. Obviously, we know that going forward, he's probably not going to be with the team. So I think if the right trade is out there, he could be gone. But I don't know. I don't feel like anybody's reaching out for Ryan Lindgren. He's kind of just, you know who he is and you know what he brings. And I feel like any team would be lucky to have Ryan Lindgren in a sense and like a new change of scenery for him. But I feel like that's going to come over the summer. So unless the right deal is there for Drury and we can piece something for him, which I would love, obviously, like because I feel like we're going to lose him anyway, would be get something for him. But I that's all dependent on these 7 games if the Rangers are making a playoff push, because if they're not making a playoff push, I don't know if we really sell too much or do anything.
I do think the Rangers make the playoffs, but I also do agree that Ryan Lindgren is probably not with the Rangers much longer. If he's a part of the deal at the deadline, great. I think that's great asset management. But I wouldn't be shooken up the way I would have been maybe last year if a guy like Lindgren is no longer on the team and he just kind of walks and sees what he can get elsewhere. It doesn't seem like it happens very often as Ranger fans that we have to kind of see somebody walk in free agency and just kind of lose them for nothing. But that might be the best case scenario with a guy like Lindgren. Maybe it doesn't look the best on paper as far as asset management, but you have to look at just his defensive impact or lack thereof and the way that he's kind of been negatively impacting the game lately. And unfortunately, it seemed like a really good return at the time in the Rick Nash deal, and even up till a couple of years ago and even up to this season. I was a big Lindgren guy, but this year has been a really rough showing for him, and I would be hopeful that upper management is watching the same thing we are.
Yeah, it's tough, man, because, like we've all kind of touched on here, he is a heart and soul guy, former winner of the Stephen McDonald Extra Effort Award, and somebody that I think for a while there was a big part of Ranger hockey, playing on that top pairing with Adam Fox. And I know some people are going to say, well, he's elevated from playing with Adam Fox. Okay, that's fine. Like, you're allowed to benefit from, playing with a good defense partner. And, something that I always point to as well, and you guys will remember this, I'm sure, the big 3-1 comeback against the Penguins a few years ago. People forget, man, like Ryan Lindgren didn't play in that series he might have been out there for game 1 and then didn't play at all in games 2, 3, and 4, and then comes back for game 5. The Rangers are down 3-1, and that's when they turn things around and win the series. So he really, I think, made a positive impact. That's not the only reason why they came back, but yeah, I think when it's all said and done, I'm just hopeful that people will appreciate what Ryan Lindgren has brought to this team rather than just remember how much his game slipped in the past season, if that makes sense. They won't. Yeah, they probably won't. Yeah.
He's given it all, like his blood on the ice, like he's the warrior. Everyone knows him for what he's done. But like the past 2 seasons have just he's really fallen off.
Yeah, that's unfair to say for sure. We're touching on these UFAs. I might as well ask about Reilly Smith too. I mean, he's been okay this season, but my thing with Smith, I've kind of joked about this on my show before. He's just been like so okay. He'll chip in offensively once in a while, but there's so many games where he doesn't really stand out a whole lot. He's got good speed. He gets in there fairly quickly on the forecheck, but he never really does anything after doing that. So I don't know. I mean, for me, he's another one. I think it's pretty obvious that he'll most likely be on his way after this season. Would you guys be up for moving Reilly Smith to kind of open the door for Brian Othman, Brett Berard? They're both hot for Hartford right now. They're both doing a good job there. Berard just recently back from an injury. But just your thoughts on Smith and how he's done, and if you'd be open to possibly moving him as well.
Well, John, I always love all your comparisons and how you describe the game because it's somewhat how I think about it. And just when I'm like giving up on Reilly Smith and it's borderline going from okay to hate, he does something good where he gets a goal and you're like, okay, Reilly Smith's okay in the Rangers world. He's decent enough. Yeah. So it's great analogy of saying the most okay player. So yeah, I would be totally open to that. it feels like we really just that piece of the Rangers. We thought maybe he'd be the first line right wing at the beginning of the season, and that really hasn't worked out. So I think it would be open to anybody like that. And like I said before, similar to the Ryan Lindgren thing, it's all based on these 7 games. If he's exploding after the break, I think great, keep him. But I think I'd be open if I was Drury to hearing things, and I think he's gone after the season.
Yeah, gotta agree with both of you, man. Most okay, totally. Be the most okay with him in a deal. He's been the like hated the most appropriate amount because there's nothing like you can really do. Like Joe said, like you'll start to kind of rag on him and then he'll contribute positively. You're like, okay, you get a pass. It's like he checked the one box he needed to, right? Like replace Goodrow's production or more, check. And if you look at Goodrow this season, I mean, maybe he hasn't impressed you the way that Goodrow did with 6 goals in the playoffs, but it seems like this was the right thing to do, is to get rid of Goodrow and insert Reilly Smith. And there was kind of like, all right, there's first line capability is like his absolute upside. I think he had 27 goals in his most in a full season. So it's like, that's maybe some upside there. And then his downside has to be like third line right wing. It's kind of funny though. The other night he was playing left wing and Lafreniere's out there playing right wing. And I was like, did Lavi forget? Like Lafreniere's a left wing. And the only reason he played right wing is because there was this like congestion. And then we get Reilly Smith to maybe solve the right wing issue. And what are we, 50 games in, and now they've completely switched?
Well,
but
it's funny, Steve. I said the same thing because like with Lafreniere scuffling the way he is, it's like maybe just throw him back on the left wing for a game and see if something clicks. And like now you have Smith playing left wing and Lafreniere's on his right wing, and it's like, why wouldn't you just flip flop the two of them? I think they were even on the same line when they did that, weren't they? For like a game, maybe. Yeah. So
maybe it was like maybe a period. It was like those were the opening line rushes. I remember that. But to your point about Othman, I think that was kind of the whole idea, was like, here's a guy that represents top line upside. Maybe he's a third line right winger. And in the way that our landscape is right now, the fourth line, there's really no room for him down there. So it kind of worked out well as like a stopgap to see if maybe this buys you time before somebody like an Othman or a Berard is ready. And it seems like from what we've seen in Berard and the NHL level, and like you mentioned, Othman has scored like 2 goals a game, it seems like, every game in Hartford recently. So really nice to see them coming along down there. Wouldn't be surprised if he's included, kind of like Lindgren, and wouldn't be heartbroken if he was gone for nothing either. But kind of interested to see what kind of time it buys us and what kind of products that we get in guys like Berard and Othman.
Absolutely. So in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. Going to have some final thoughts here, talk about whether or not the Rangers make the playoffs, and maybe some guys that need to step up down the stretch if the Rangers are going to indeed do just that. And we will get to that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. So question I have for both of you is the Rangers, obviously, trying to get into the playoffs, 3 points out coming out of this break here. Who's like 1 or 2 players for each of you on the Rangers that you feel, really need to kind of step on the gas and pick things up and, frankly, maybe just play better than they have for most or all of the season if this team is going to, ultimately emerge as one of the last couple of teams into the Eastern Conference playoffs?
Well, I mentioned before with the JT Miller trade, I feel like Mika Zibanejad has definitely benefited from that. He has, 8 points in the last 5 games, and I think that's definitely because of JT Miller. But for me, Mika has been similar to Lindgren and not the same player we've seen in years past. So for me, I think he needs to put the pedal to the metal, and I think he needs to come with the consistency. It's funny, I was going through like my Rangers folder and I was looking through funny memes and stuff, and I was like, I really hope we get a good Mika March this year coming up, because we're getting closer and closer to it. And I'm like, that would really catapult us where this team needs to head. And I think also the Breadman really needs to step up and take almost leadership. Obviously, we'll see Trocheck and Miller stepping to more of a leadership role, I think, going down the stretch here. But I'd also like to see Bread be a big contributor and the power play to keep performing. Obviously, we've seen since Trocheck's been part of the Rangers, faceoffs have been great. So I'd like to see that. But I'd like us to play a complete game going down the stretch. So I think playing complete games will determine if we make the playoffs. And I think if you asked any Rangers fan, if you thought the Rangers were going to make the playoffs, I don't think there's a wrong answer if you said no, and I don't think there's a wrong answer if you said yes. For me, I'm diehard Rangers. I think we're going to figure it out. I think Igor's going to come back from the injury. He's already skating out with the team, and I think we're going to make the playoffs, and I think JT Miller really becomes the reason why.
Stemming off of what you said, man, and this is something that John, you and I and Joe have touched on episodes that we've done in the past, and thanks again for having us on. I always enjoy this relationship that we have, that we get to do this, and
Absolutely.
Something that we've chatted about is there's a lot of players. You can go down the list of players that could be a difference maker on this team, and I think that that's what gives me hope that they'll make the playoffs. I am of the mindset that we do make the playoffs, and there's a long list beyond both Joe and I's answers of who could kind of show up and surprise you. And Trocheck is a guy that Joe was kind of touching on, that we've seen some of the things like the face-offs, but it would be nice to see that player that we saw last season. And he plays a kind of different brand of hockey, and also one of those guys that is now getting the benefit of playing with a guy like Miller. And I think this little Four Nations break of playing some meaningful hockey, I think this will do those guys specifically, Miller and Trocheck. This will be a great thing to kind of rebound and take all of that experience forward with. And Miller's a guy that I think, and remember, there's no captain in this room, so I think Trocheck and Miller can kind of really grab this thing by the horns and steer the ship towards not only the playoffs, but it's really the captaincy for the taking is really what it is. So if one of these guys, like a Mika, like Joe touched on, if one of these guys kind of really just takes the ship, I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody upgraded next year. But those are the guys that I would say to kind of look for. But it can happen from anybody. We've seen Adam Fox not have really the year that we've kind of maybe expected him to bounce back from injury for him. So yeah, really excited to get this back underway.
Yeah, you touched on something there that I was going to ask you about. Might as well just do it now. Captain next season. For me, first of all, I think they name one going into next season. I don't think it'll happen like before then. But for me, it seems like Vincent Trocheck has really kind of established himself as the front runner to wear the C for the Rangers. I mean, for you guys, first of all, would you name a captain before next season? And if you do, is Trocheck your guy? I'd like to see Trocheck as captain, and maybe you have JT Miller. He's got that relationship with Trocheck, so maybe he's one of the alternates next season. But what do you guys think as far as the leadership group next season?
Well, I think JT Miller was definitely brought in for not only this season to see if he can help salvage this season, but I think definitely some leadership going forward. We're definitely going to see some big contracts falling off, and who knows, so we'll have a lot of new faces. But one person I wanted to bring up besides Vincent Trocheck, who I think would be a great captain, but I might think gets overlooked, would be Adam Fox. I think dependent on the team, obviously Steve just noted that, I expected a more powerful performance this season from Adam Fox, but he's still 40-plus apples in 5 seasons as a defenseman. So, I could see us somewhat going with a younger captain and someone like that's going to be part of the franchise for a while. And maybe if we end up going with some of these younger guys like Othman and Perreault, maybe that's the way we go with a younger captain in that sense.
I've said this before about captaincy in general in hockey. I don't think it has to be your best player, but I do think that it has to be someone who can be a catalyst and who can jump over the boards and say, I'm going to do it. And a lot of the times on a lot of teams, that's their best player. And there's good merit for guys to be the captain. And we see assistant captains go to players that kind of can be like this more the scorer and be leaned on, but not be that guy. I think that Trocheck has always shown an ability to show up in big games, and I think that he possesses that ability kind of like a Jordan Staal on the Hurricane, somebody that he played with, to be like, hey, I'm going to be, maybe he's a 60-point player, Trocheck, but he's going to try really, really hard every time he goes over the boards, and he has just as good of an opportunity as anybody on his line to be the one who cashes in. I think to that same merit, somebody like JT Miller also could just take, this is his team basically now. If he plays the way he did in those first 2 games, it's crazy. He plays like that without a practice, and then all of a sudden he practices with the team, and now he can't. can't play. But it's like, if he can play like that, man, this is his team. But to the Adam Fox point, man, Adam Fox is a quiet leader. He might not say out loud, I'm going to go do it, but with his actions, Fox is definitely a game-breaking player who can step over the boards and make a huge impact. So as long as it goes to somebody like that, I think the problem was it went to a guy like Trouba, and the only way he's going to really impact the game is taking someone's head off. And we saw it work a few times, but it's just maybe not what you need in those big moments when you're down by a couple of goals.
Yeah, something I said about Trouba, getting toward the end of his Ranger tenure there, and obviously a rough showing for him in the playoffs last year. I think maybe at the time when he was named captain, it made sense. He was the way to go. And to your point, you don't really need the captain to necessarily be the absolute best player on the team. This is going to sound harsh, but the captain can also be the worst player on the team. And that's what Jacob Trouba basically was toward the end of his Ranger tenure. So for me, it was time for a change. I mean, I'm glad that they didn't, rip the C off of his jersey before this season, because that would have just added even more drama, which is the last thing that this team needs. But I am glad that they're going in a different direction now. And it sounds like, maybe next year we're looking at general consensus here. Are we thinking like Trocheck or Fox is maybe the captain? I would go Trocheck, but you guys seem to like Fox. Maybe Miller's an alternate. Panarin's still an alternate. I mean, does that sound about right to everybody?
It sounds about right. And I'm just going to go back to our trade deadline point. Will Kreider be there getting the A next year, or will he be pieced along at the trade deadline?
You know what? That's a question I've asked multiple times on here, so I'll throw it to both of you guys, because I think Kreider will survive this trade deadline. I don't think Kreider is on this team opening night next season. That's kind of my bold prediction, my somewhat hot take, although I don't even know how hot of a take it is at this point. But what do you think, guys? Is Chris Kreider still a Ranger next season?
I don't know. I still remember Chris Kreider's first game like it was yesterday. So for me, that just like made me want to just be like, no, like, because he survived so many regimes and everything that it just feels like the guy that he's going to finish his career. So it would be the most Rangers thing that he wouldn't finish his career, but I'd like to see him finish his career, but it's all dependent on his play.
It's funny how much can change so quickly, man, because a friend of mine bought a house. He was remodeling. He's not finished with it yet. And the Hedl contract was announced when he told me that. He's not finished, and Hedl's no longer a Ranger. So, like, it can happen really quickly where you're like, yeah, this guy will be here for a long time. And Kreider, I felt like maybe last year would be like, wow, what a great contract to prove with each year, with each coming expansion of the salary cap, what a deal. Even as recent as maybe the start of the season, with starting out with being on pace to maybe pot 40 goals again. It's like, wow, look at Chris Kreider again, defying time. And 40 games later, I could agree with you that maybe he's not a Ranger next year. It's crazy how much can just change like that. And I also don't think, again, that a trade is really the thing. It's weird to be so like okay with some of these guys just not being there and not really getting out of anything but the money that's involved with this, because that's kind of what gets lost in all of the Kakko, Hedl, Trouba. Like add up that right there, that's $16 million just from what they currently make, probably more. That's probably being generous there. Especially when you especially when you include Lindgren and more names to that. You're talking about seismically changing $30 million and the cap space going up. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot in the works, and you get rid of Kreider in that gives you a lot of wiggle room to do a lot. And something we didn't touch on at all on our show or here just now, that the JT Miller thing, this isn't just like a temporary deal. Like, this isn't just like shipping out a first round pick to get like a guy that, man, fingers crossed, maybe he works out and we have a deep like postseason run. Like, this dude's on contract for another, I believe it's 6 years. This is great. Like, this is great for us long term, I feel like, and it gives you something to kind of build around next year. When you look at the top six, when you look at the roster the way that it's currently built, I think that he makes a huge difference on those teams that went to the Eastern Conference Finals. And you look at the team building towards next year, it gives you kind of the wiggle room to maybe slide somebody like a Kreider out.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And I think what kind of adds to that is the fact that JT Miller has all this position versatility. You can play him literally anywhere in the lineup and with any two guys, and he'll go out there and make it work. It is kind of crazy to think, though, Steve, you just touched on this, where maybe something that saves Kreider is the fact that they already have moved away a couple of, fairly expensive contracts. You've got Reilly Smith, who's going to be a free agent. That frees up some more money as well. Keandre Miller, that could go either way. I could see them re-signing him. I could see him maybe being shipped out because they don't want to pay him whatever he thinks he's worth. And the salary cap's going to go up as well. So it would be funny if it really did just come down to the money and the Rangers looking at it like, well, Kreider, $6.5 million, that's becoming more of a bargain just because of the salary cap going up. So it's definitely an interesting situation. We'll see how it all plays out. But I got to ask you about Peter Laviolette as well. Last year, he could do no wrong, right? Rangers have the best record in the league, and here they are making a run through the playoffs. And this year, I feel like he's not as much to blame for the struggles as certainly the players and maybe even Drury as well. But at a certain point, this team went 4-19 in a 23-game stretch. At a certain point, that falls on the coach a little bit. I don't like the idea of the Rangers changing coaches every 6 months, but I'd like to see him get one more crack at it next year. But what do you guys think? Will he be back, and would you like to see him back?
I think we're kind of in a little bit of a transition here where I think we actually keep Laviolette. I haven't been the happiest with Laviolette. Obviously, we didn't know what was going on in the locker room, so I didn't feel like changing the coach was the right move. But then we hit that real bad skid, and we saw what the Blues did, and they hired Jim Montgomery there, and I was like, man, we really just missed out on the Jim Montgomery sweepstakes where we could have just even considered that as an option. But Laviolette down the line, I don't think anything's safe. I don't think anybody's safe on the team long term. Obviously, we know JT Miller and the guys we've talked about on the show today. But if things go really bad, you could see Drury make a change in the summer, but I really don't think he does unless this last quarter of the season just hits the bomb and blows up and implodes on everybody.
I think this is Drury showing you what more do you want from me? I moved on from huge names that were hard discussions to have. We moved first round picks out. We got guys that were coveted by the franchise for years. We did cap gymnastics and sent people up for, you remember that, for days. There was just all this crazy stuff to just for a few $1,000s just to make Kane and Tarasenko Rangers. Yeah. I think Drury's hand has been pretty transparent that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to win the Stanley Cup. And when you move out, again, what I would consider to be as little as we did to make JT Miller a Ranger, and from immediate, it works. I think there's a lot of pressure to ride that initial momentum that we got. It reminds me of the same way that Tarasenko goal happened. Everybody knew it was going to happen. There's a certain magic in the air that you have to bottle and capture. I do think that Igor comes back from this injury. I do think that he goes on a run just like Joe says. And I think that there's a certain pressure to make another move at the deadline, make this thing play. Everyone look at this roster and think this is playoff worthy, this is cup worthy. And if Laviolette doesn't get you out of the first round, I think that's every merit to be look, I did everything in my power if you're Drury to make a cup happen in New York. We got to move on from somebody like you to somebody who can do it for us right now. And that's, I think, fair. But if he gets you to the Eastern Conference Final again, do you really want to kick out Laviolette? I mean,
who's going to want to coach here, right? Yeah.
He's got to be the coach. So it's a hard position to be in. And I think I'm just like anybody that if we don't make the playoffs or we get canned in the first round, maybe even the second. I mean, where's the line if it's you, John, for playoff versus
that's a tough one, man.
Lavi?
See, my big thing, the playoffs and how this team does down the stretch and whether they get in or not and how they fare in the playoffs, obviously that stuff is all going to matter and that's all going to factor into the decision as well as should. But again, I touched on it just a second ago. I just don't like the idea of this team never kind of going all in with a head coach. I mean, they were talking about maybe firing Laviolette in season this year. And granted, when a hockey team goes 4-19, that's often what you see happen, right? The coach is going to get canned. But if they made that change in season, and I guess in theory they still could. I don't think they will at this point in the season. But if they were to have made that change, the Rangers would be on their fourth head coach in the last 5 years. And this is a team that has mostly been good. Like they've been in the conference final 2 of the last 3 years. Like how do you even like wrap your head around that, right? So for me at a certain point, it's like, all right, you got to dig in. You got to say, this is our coach. We're going forward with it. And send the message to the players that, you guys are not going to quit on another coach. You're going to have to figure it out. You're going to have to get the job done. You're going to have to listen to what he says and figure out a way to go out there and win. I just don't like constantly changing coaches the way that the Rangers have. And I think of the more recent Ranger coaches, Laviolette's probably the one that I would prefer over, say, Gallant or Quinn or, I mean, AV had his success here, but he was clearly on the way out, at the very end. So that's just
John. I like your point though, because you make me think about Tampa Bay and the Bolts. If they didn't stick it out with John Cooper, he takes them to a cup, and then they have that first round exit where they just get annihilated by the Blue Jackets there, and you think maybe they need a change in coaching, but they just stick it out with John Cooper, and obviously we've seen what he did for them, and it works out. But then I bring up the other point of you look at the Florida Panthers, they end up winning, firing their coach midseason, end up winning with an interim coach in Burnett, and win the President's Trophy, and then don't bring him back and end up getting a Paul Maurice, where then, so it's just right situation, right time, I think, and knowing if the guy is the right guy.
Yeah, and Maurice was under fire there, from what I understand. We were talking with Armando from Locked On Panthers, and for a while there, obviously before they won the Cup last year, people were not really understanding what the Panthers were doing and why these changes are being made and why is Maurice trying to reinvent the wheel. But as you can see, they eventually bought in, and it leads to a Stanley Cup for the Panthers. So, yeah, man, there's a bunch of different ways you can look at it. I mean, I guess this is going back like 5 or 6 years at this point, but the Blues, the year that they won the Stanley Cup, they made a coaching change in the middle of the season. So it's not unheard of. Hockey, I feel like with coaching, it's very difficult to know, probably more so than the other sports, exactly when it's time for a change and exactly when you should pull the trigger. So I'm very curious to see what happens. Like I said, I don't think it'll happen in season, just because if he survives 4-19, then he'll survive the rest of the stretch here. But yeah, I think it really could come down to
I'd like some of the assistants, like Phil Housley or something for the Rangers with all the defensive problems we've had, maybe gone, and somewhat of that, because I feel like Lavi's steered the ship, but it's just we've seen flare-ups of where the Rangers have just looked inept.
Yeah, Housley's definitely come under fire from a good portion of the fan base. I always feel like, though, like with the head coach, you should let him go with his guys. If you're gonna make the change, then make the change. Get rid of everybody.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I've been with that. But yeah.
Well, brother, thanks again for chatting with us, man.
Yeah, of course, man. Happy to have you guys. It's been a blast as always, and we'll keep doing this, man. We'll go through the season, the postseason, the off season. We'll just keep taking turns on each other's podcasts. It's always a pleasure. Always great talking hockey with you guys.
John, I always appreciate talking hockey with you. Let's go Rangers.
Let's go Rangers. All right. And actually, while you're here, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you guys on social media and where they can find Broadway Block?
Now, everywhere you can stream your podcast media, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, Apple, app Broadway Block. Thanks again, man.
Yeah, of course. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.